Here's a simple design for a sturdy workbench that you can adapt to your own specs and needs. I originally built this table as a workbench when I was rebuilding a 1976 Honda CB550 motorcycle. That project is done, so I'm repurposing it now as a wedging and work table for clay. The basic design is 4 legs, 2 taller in the back for a shelf above with LED underlighting, and 2 boxes that bolt on as a lower storage shelf and the bench top, all held together with carriage bolts. The carriage bolts make it very sturdy, but also easy to deconstruct, so that I can move it in several pieces by myself. I used a dozen carriage bolts with washers and nuts. I'm connecting 2x, which are actually 1.5 inches thick, so I used 4-inch bolts. I built this with scrap lumber that I collected over time, and eventually I had enough solid 2x6 boards to make something useful. I like using 2x6s for the legs here, but if you're buying lumber, I think 2x4s will be plenty for the bench top. The bottom shelf sits on blocks that are screwed onto the 4 legs. This makes it sturdier and makes assembly very easy. I cut all of these pieces to the dimensions I wanted. This table is 4 feet long and 2 feet deep, and I drilled through the pieces that I'm now connecting with bolts. You can clamp this front cross piece onto the legs and drill through them together, and repeat that with the others. As you can see, assembly is easy because all the holes line up and the bolts just slide in. This bottom shelf also adds a lot of rigidity. Otherwise, I'd have these long stilts for legs that would need reinforcing anyway. It also lowers the center of gravity of the whole bench, adding stability. With buckets of clay on it, it's not going anywhere. And it's the same procedure for the top. This bench top is just a box with what are essentially joists in the middle to make sure the top doesn't bend or sag with weight on it. These 4 pieces are cut to one length, and these 2 to another length, and they're all screwed together. The actual measurements will vary depending on how deep or long you want your bench top to be. Then just tighten the nuts down until they press the washer into the wood, as you can see here. But don't go overboard. You'll split the wood and compromise the strength. The upper shelf is just a piece of particle board shelving I found, supported by 45-degree blocks. These are simple to cut. Just use a speed square as a guide and cut a perfect 45-degree with a circular saw. The curved piece here is just the scrap left over from cutting an arched doorway. It's partly a half-assed attempt at decoration, but mostly it blocks the light from these LEDs that I taped to the underside of the shelf. So the light doesn't shine into my eyes, but still shines light down onto the work surface. Use whatever you've got for a surface. I used some of that particle board shelving previously, but for wedging clay, I'm using some scrap plywood with duck canvas stapled over the top. Now this isn't as stable as I'd like because right now it's on carpet, but it is bomb-proof when on solid ground. It's heavy, and no part of it gives in any direction, even with all of my weight behind a hunk of clay. I'm wedging up some local clay I dug straight out of the ground. If you want to learn more about what clay is, how to find and process it for pottery, go ahead and check out the other videos in my pottery playlist. Now, if I really wanted to put books on the upper shelf and not have them jostle around when I'm wedging, I could screw these uprights into studs in the wall. So that's it. Feel free to adapt this to your size and needs. In total, I used about 40 board feet of lumber. It would be a bit expensive if I hadn't scrounged all of this for free, but as is, my only expense was a few screws and the dozen carriage bolts and washers and nuts. I think they're about $2 a pop. And then this duck canvas, which I got from Joann Fabrics, was $10 a yard, and I used half a yard. And then these LED light strips, but they're quite cheap on Amazon. And in the end, you've got this really great, sturdy workbench with some lighting for your workspace and plenty of storage. This same basic design can be used for pretty much any sort of work surface, from wedging clay to rebuilding a motorcycle to making jewelry. So let me know if you make something based on this design and what you're using it for. I'd love to hear. Thanks for watching.